to item 67, which is our update on the litigation Picasso Incorporated versus the City of St. Helena and discussion of land use impacts associated with temporary usage by non-primary owners of fractionally owned homes, which was one of the longest titles. I felt like I had to say it out loud because that was a mouthful and that would not make a very good acronym. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Director of Permit Sonoma, Tennis Wick.
Thank you, Chair and members of the board. As you well know, for the last 100 years, vacation homes have been part of Sonoma County's identity. Witness Fitch Mountain, the Russian River, and our coastal communities. Over the last 25 years, as our county has become an international tourist destination, short use of rental residential properties has become popular. Vacation rental regulation has tried to mitigate these neighborhood impacts. But we have a revised ordinance coming to you in March 2022 to address that particular part. Recently, Picasso has introduced a new short-term use, which the company defines by what it is not rather than what it is. It's caused a particular concern in Dry Creek, Sonoma Valley, and other communities with the impacts of this new product. In Napa County, Picasso's presence has resulted in litigation with the City of St. Helena. Here to discuss that case is my colleague, Deputy County Counsel Ivan Jimenez. Counsel?
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. Ivan Jimenez with the County Counsel's Office. Just to give a quick update or summary of the litigation between Picasso and the City of Santa Helena. For those who may not be familiar, in April of this year, Picasso sued the City of Santa Helena. And in this litigation, Picasso made several allegations, including that the city was targeting it, that the city's timeshare ordinance didn't apply to Picasso, that the city was interfering with Picasso's economic activities, and other arguments. Picasso has displayed pretty aggressive tactics, given that the litigation was filed before the city commenced an enforcement action. And that is something that we would like to clarify. I believe the staff report mentions that Santa Helena commenced an enforcement action, but that's a typographical error. Picasso actually sued before the city commenced an enforcement action. The lawsuit was largely based on a letter that the city council prepared and sent to realtors in the city. And this letter was just informing them of a future public meeting that was going to be held to discuss, whether Picasso was engaging in any activities that were violating the city ordinances, including the timeshare ordinance. Santa Helena filed an anti-SLAPP motion, which is a motion that that is proper when a lawsuit is targeting free speech or protected activities. In this case, the motion was arguing that Picasso's lawsuit was based on this proper communication, which was the letter that the city council prepared. And the purpose of that was the purpose of the lawsuit was to prevent the city from engaging in dialogue with its constituents and even exploring whether the city's timeshare ordinance was being violated. The court sided with the City of Santa Helena and removed those two claims from the lawsuit, but the lawsuit is still moving forward. And this lawsuit is currently in the discovery phase. Discovery can be timely, so it's unclear at what point it will conclude, but trial is set for July 11th, 2022 at this moment. And the remaining issues are whether the city's timeshare ordinance applies to Picasso and whether it's a valid exercise of constitutional powers. If there are any questions, I would be glad to answer them at this moment.
Thank you. Supervisor Gore?
Yeah, sure. First question is, what's an anti-SLAPP lawsuit?
So SLAPP stands for Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation. So when you file an anti-SLAPP lawsuit, you are indicating that the litigation that was filed against you is really trying to shut down speech and public participation process. So in this case, the city was alleging, that this lawsuit was really trying to prevent it from engaging in protected activity, which is, to have a public forum to discuss whether the city's timeshare ordinance was implicated at all.
Shoot, I could riff on a couple jokes on an anti-SLAPP lawsuit for hours, but I don't think that's the purpose of our time here. I'm interested in other discussions with other jurisdictions. I know this is a issue that's been discussed, I would assume, in different counties and cities in terms of closed session, strategically because of some of the reasons you've talked about. But just interested in what we're seeing out there, if other jurisdictions outside of St. Helena are engaging, into what level.
Yeah, to our knowledge, there have not been any code enforcement actions commenced by the jurisdictions in the state, and we are also not aware of this being a matter that has been agendized in other jurisdictions.
I want to maybe ask our counsel, whether it's Yvonne, Jennifer, or Bob Pittman, really to frame kind of what we're bringing before us here, because we as a board have had, and I won't disclose what that is closed session conversations on this item. And so I want to make sure that I'm appropriate in myself and also my colleagues in how to address our time here today within the purviews of let's talk about the legal confines that sometimes let us fly and sometimes strap us down.
I'll take a stab at that unless Bob does. The purpose of today's meeting, as laid out by Director Rick, in addition to receiving an update on the St. Helena litigation, is to hear from the public on land use impacts, which can inform the direction that the county goes, whether that's policy oriented, legal actions, or other. So in terms of choices that the board makes, I think the idea is to have that be informed by what's actually happening in our community, and hearing from the public is an instrumental part of that.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you mentioning that. As one of the people who requested this to be a public session, I want to honor the fact that we have a good opportunity here to hear from the folks that we've been getting emails from. I've been getting a lot of different meetings and discussions, and have publicly talked about this issue a few times in the media, while also acknowledging, as we've talked about, some of the legal constraints that might surround this issue as we deal with around this county on a lot of other issues. So once again, appreciate and know that we have quite a few people lined up to comment. I look forward to hearing from them, and then advising on appropriate action on the aftermath. So I appreciate that. I might have some more questions, but I want to honor the fact that there's a lot of people who've been waiting to speak on this item as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gore. Supervisor Gorin, I know this has been a top concern of yours as well.
I want to thank all of the members of the community for their comments over the last couple of months, and I really need to thank Tenniswick and the County Council for providing this opportunity for us to hear from them. And now I really would like to hear from them regarding the impacts that they currently are experiencing or have fears about experiencing in their neighborhoods. So I really want to hear from you, and I'll look forward to public comment.
Thank you, Supervisor Gorin. Supervisors Corsi Rabbit, no questions? All right, and I do not have any questions either. So it seems like an appropriate time to open it up to public comment. And I did get a note from council that we might be pushing back our public comment. Is that what you're thinking on the items not listed on the agenda?
Depending on how long we go.
Yeah, so just a heads up, that was scheduled, I believe, was that scheduled for 4:30? And so depending on the length of public comment on this agenda item, it may be pushed back a little bit. So just wanted to let folks know that is coming. Council Pittman?
Yeah, just pointing out with the addendum, there's one other item before general public comment, and that's the sale of Sinead.
Oh, right. Yes, that was a regular calendar item. Appreciate that reminder. Yes, so we do have Sinead before we accept public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. So with that, I will look and see if there are any members of the public in person who wish to comment on this item, which is the Picasso litigation. Seeing none, I will go ahead and hand it over to Karen to accept public comment via Zoom.
Thank you. For our Zoom attendees, if you'd like to speak on this matter, please raise your hand or press *9 on your phone. Okay, our first speaker is Bruce. Bruce, when prompted, please unmute and begin speaking.
And Karen, can I ask how many folks are there?
Oh, yes, that's right. We have about 10.
Okay, great. And so let's go ahead and keep that to 90 seconds, please. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, here we go. All right, Bruce. Again, when prompted, please unmute and begin speaking.
Okay, hi, this is Bruce Abramson. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Bruce Abramson. I'm a 30-year resident of Healdsburg. I'm a mortgage broker, and just as an aside, as you probably know, Healdsburg has a very successful ban on vacation rentals, and the public in general and everybody's been very pleased with it. So my comments is that, like Santolina is currently considering, I hope you can find a way to ban this fractional home ownership model. The fear is that right now they can do up to 8 shares per property. That's 0.12% ownership. Well, what if they had 50 ownership shares? Who's to say what the number of shares could be? This is an issue that could grow way beyond what this is and the implications, because all of the owners can then use their ownership for gifts or such. So the 8 ownership shares that are shown, that's 44 days a year. Now, that's temporary use. So I have some comments. The lender, the Picasso is saying that the properties are used as owner-occupied single-family homes. Your code says differently. As a mortgage broker, this is not a single-family ownership. There has to be a majority, over 50% use of that property by one owner to be considered owner-occupied. And the second.
For your comments, that concludes our time. Eric, you are next. Please, when prompted, unmute and begin to speak.
Oh, thank you. This is Eric Fraser with Truth in Tourism. So this item is on your agenda, and it's a much larger item, certainly deserves more than 90 seconds when you're trying to solicit information from the public. But we understand this for what it is. In other words, you have a preordained agenda for vilifying this company and its fractional ownership plan. Our goal is to see that we can segue this into actual fact-driven analysis of issues regarding STRs and, by inference now, fractional ownership. In other words, what is required now is a full CEQA-mandated environmental impact report about STRs in the county. This type of half-baked, sort of factless, sort of libel-driven type of drivel that you're serving up as you try to expand how you control private property rights in the county is pretty shameless and has to come to a stop. Hopefully we'll be able to triangulate off of the good work that the Coastal Commission has done to protect constitutional rights of visitors and property owners and bring that inland in the STR ordinance that's being contemplated. While you're expanding the STR conversation to Picasso, it's probably a good opportunity to net some of their attention into a legal process. Thank you very much.
Connie is next. Connie, when prompted, please unmute and begin to speak.
Yes, hi, I'm Connie Wilson, a Santolina native, and I'm very concerned about the arrival of Picasso in our residential neighborhoods. They currently own at least 4 houses in Santolina, And while they tout their desire to become part of our community, Picasso has never once reached out to concerned citizens regarding their intentions. Their lawsuit causes great financial burden to our city. A direct quote from the Picasso blog states, "We buy homes in neighborhoods with top-tier vacation properties and a vibrant community of second homes." This statement could not be further from the truth in St. Helena. All of Picasso's timeshares are located in generational, working-class residential neighborhoods in direct violation of our municipal codes. Their vacation properties are next to senior citizens, retirees, local workers, and most concerning, families with young children. These neighbors know and interact with each other in our small community. Picasso houses are all within walking distance of 3 schools, with much foot traffic from young children. With up to 8 different owners of Picasso properties, each unknown to the other, neighbors will never know who is coming and going. Residents care about affordable housing and the dwindling availability of rentals. They care about maintaining the sanctity and vibrancy of their residential neighborhoods. They do not support Picasso's bullying tactics of circumventing local ordinance.
That completes our time. Thank you for your comment. Our next commenter is Barbara. Barbara, when prompted, please unmute and begin to speak.
My name is Barbara O'Donnell. I'd like to bring to the fore some of the feelings of the Dry Creek Valley residents and farmers in Dry Creek Valley on the issue of fractionated ownership. Many of us are deeply concerned about the projects that are like Picasso. Picasso is not necessarily the only one. And there are also encroaching VRBOs that are in the process of converting farmlands as well as our rural communities into basically a sprawling hotel. We asked the Board of Supervisors to direct its staff to prepare amendments to the existing County Development Code Section 2624-130 entitled Dwelling, Single Family, and also Section 2628-160 entitled Lodging, Vacation, to clarify that fractional ownership projects are not defined as a single-family dwelling, but instead fall within the definition of vacation lodging. The DCVA has prepared a text to amend these sections, and that has been sent to Supervisor Gore. We're happy to collaborate with county staff to bring these amendments before you for formal adoption. I see that my time's running out, but again, there's section 2624-130 on dwelling, single-family dwellings, and the second one is 2628-160.
That completes our time. Thank you for your comments. Our next commenter is Sonia. Sonia, please, when prompted, unmute and begin to speak. Sonia, unfortunately, because of your version of Zoom, you're not able to make comments. Please feel free to email us your comments at bos@sonoma-county.org. Our next speaker is Gabriel. Gabriel, when prompted, please unmute and begin to speak.
My name is Gabriel Smith, and I'm a government and community relations manager at Picasso. Just want to, add a little kind of facts about what's going on here. Co-ownership is a common practice today, often involving families that inherit and hold property in a trust or friends who want to buy a second home as an LLC. Picasso buys luxury homes only. In Sonoma County, Picasso has purchased 3 homes in total at an average price of $4.4 million each. Picasso does not compete for lower or middle tier homes and does not make major home improvements. All of our owners subscribe to Picasso's code of conduct, making sure that they're involved in the community. Their investment is that of ownership. They are committed to the community. They pay property taxes. We make sure we buy properties that are generally unoccupied for 90 to 90% of the time. So rather than luxury second homes sitting empty all year, these owners are supporting the local economy year around. Thank you.
Our next commenter is Nancy. Nancy, please, when prompted, unmute and begin speaking.
Hi, this is Nancy. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to make comment in an open discussion. We believe that Picasso is commercializing our neighborhoods with this model. It's basically a transitory occupancy vacation home in disguise. We reside on Old Winery Court, a very quiet, modest cul-de-sac where a home was purchased by Picasso 6 months ago. And because the group Sonomans opposing Picasso stop have made it very unwelcoming, we believe that we've been able to prevent this destruction of our neighborhood. I'm running out of time. I have so much more I'd like to say, but you're already aware of all the negative impacts of the destruction to the fiber and quality of our community that this model causes. We're asking you to pass an ordinance that would prohibit fractionalized ownership by unrelated parties in areas zoned for single-family homes. Should this not be stopped in our neighborhood, the proliferation will metastasize like a cancer. Instead of one home in Sonoma and 2 in Hillsburg, there will be dozens throughout our county. Thank you.
Our next commenter is Bridget. Bridget, when prompted, please unmute and begin speaking.
Thank you. This is Bridget Mansell. I live in Hillsburg, and I would say I am definitely a middle-class person living in a city that has been experiencing inflated real estate prices. I'm about to pay my Sonoma County bill, and I'd like you all to look at it. It's public record that I'm now paying almost $12,000 a year for Sonoma County tax property, and I don't mind doing all that. But as a middle-class person, I disagree with the previous speaker who suggested that this masquerade or somehow this common practice today of fractionated ownership does not impact the middle class or the middle income people because it inflates property values. And I know everyone wants to get excited about that and say, Bridget, sell your house. But it's my family home and it's a community that I've invested in. And I really don't appreciate being told to sell out because that's the way it goes in Hillsburg is you're going to have to get away with that. Take the profit. If you look at Picasso's marketing pitch, it caters to investors who just want to rent the property out when they're not in the residence, or when they're in the residence, they're not really using it for their primary residence. So it's like a vacation home, not a second home even with your own possessions, but that pride of ownership isn't there. And this is an opportunity. So I hope that you're bold and I hope you get ahead of this. And I know that you're worried about housing in Sonoma County, and this is the time to take it on. And I really hope you're bold in looking at how we can prevent Picasso from expanding and creating more inflated property values and pushing out the people like me that want.
That concludes our time. Thank you for your comment. Our next commenter is Carl. Carl, when prompted, please unmute and begin speaking. Carl?
Okay,
Carl,
my name is Carl. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not very experienced with Zoom, as you can tell. Your attention to this issue is greatly anticipated by those of us who are concerned about the alarming spread of vacation homes into quiet family neighborhoods. I am grateful to Supervisor Gorin, who has a long record of leadership on the regulation of vacation rentals. The potential commercialization of residential areas will have multiple negative impacts on the quality and character of our communities. If Picasso is allowed to circumvent the regulations designed to protect our neighborhoods, all the typical problems associated with transient occupancy in residential areas could be expected. And bear this in mind. When a home becomes a, in quotes, Picasso, it will never again be available to a local family. There's no need to wait until the Picasso lawsuit against Santolina is settled. If the judge finds that the timeshare ordinance does not apply, that simply means that St. Helena needs to create a stronger ordinance, one that covers transient occupancy vacation homes of all types. Sonoma County must take proactive steps to stop Picasso in its tracks. Time is of the essence. Thank you.
Our next commenter is Lou. Lou, when prompted, please unmute and begin speaking.
Hi, I'm Lou Preston. My family and I have lived and farmed food and grown grapes and made wine in Dry Creek Valley for 50 years. And I'm a second generation farmer in Sonoma County. We've had dairy and prunes along the Russian River. And I've been on the several boards of the Dry Creek Valley Association over the years. And I was the founding president of the wine growers of Dry Creek. I say all this because I've seen how detrimental it can be to have competing commercial and conflicting personal interests in a farming area. I've watched as neighbors fought to stop gravel mining in Dry Creek. I followed efforts to keep Healdsburg development from crossing the freeway into the valley. I've heard complaints about spreading manure in the orchards, and sulfuring your vineyards at 4 in the morning, and roosters crowing at night, and so forth. Turning to Picasso, with the intentional misspelling, the name smacks of cultural appropriation, taking or claiming something of value from its true creators. Is this timeshare ownership, does that include timeshare of the efforts put into farming? Does it include the timeshare of investment and commitment to the local community? Will the timeshare include the enhancement and preservation of soils and the natural environment? I don't think so. What it is the opportunistic workaround of the Sonoma County General Plan that is designed to protect our.
That completes our time. Thank you for your comments. Our next commenter is B. Ganong. When prompted, please unmute and begin to speak.
Hi, thank you. My name is Bruce Ganong, and thanks to the members of the board for the time. I'm a Sonoma homeowner, and I actually use my home as a second home property. My primary residence is in Marin. I've been watching this public discussion about Picasso since last year when the St. Helena story hit the news, and honestly, the negative backlash is a little surprising to me. Personally, I support their business model of enabling second homeowners like me to invest in Sonoma County. These homes are not being acquired as for rent properties like some of the speakers have suggested. The benefit of their model is enabling multiple owners to invest in the county and in their community where they own and support local businesses. I would oppose any extension of an Airbnb business model in Sonoma, and clearly this is not that. So I thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Clyde. Clyde, when prompted, please unmute and begin to speak.
Thank you. I'd like to start with Dennis Wick. He indicated that vacation home ownership has been in Sonoma Valley for 100 years or more. So for 100 years or more, when a mother and father died and they left their property to their 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 children, you instantly had fractional ownership interest in the property. And when those 10 children decided how they were going to occupy the property, they came up with a quote-unquote algorithm, which is what Picasso is using, to determine how are we going to share this property and how are we going to use it. They could come to the property as they wanted. They could come every other day. They could invite whoever they wanted to invite to the property. They could do everything within the legal limits would allow them to use their asset as they wanted as shared owners of the property. Picasso is no different. The algorithm is just applying modern technology to allow 8 owners of a property to determine how they're going to share the property. And as far as it coming back into private ownership, of course it can come back into private ownership. One person could buy each interest and own it 100%. Picasso's model does not preclude that. So there needs to be a lot of investigation and then education. This sounds more like NIMBYism than actually a problem that needs to be solved. Thank you.
Our next commenter is Jan. Jan, when prompted, please unmute and begin to speak.
Hello, my name is Jan Metler, and I'm a property owner in Dry Creek Valley. In January, I notified Supervisor Gore and his staff of a general plan violation in the most restricted protective farmland. LIA, as you all know, is land intensive agriculture. And what no one has spoken to here today is that Picasso is a commercial enterprise unrelated to agriculture. They flip homes, they put together an LLC, they put together the mortgage lending, and then they manage the homes. It is no different than a swinging door of a hotel, and it is unrelated fractional ownership. Now, the general plan is the policy of the land for Sonoma County and Sonoma County government since the beginning. And Honorable Board, you stand on the shoulders of your predecessors who anticipated increased development, growth management, and legal threats. They met these challenges in accordance with the general plan. And I ask you today, is this your stewardship policy? Will you allow an unregulated commercial enterprise to profit at the expense of our county? Thank you.
Our next commenter is Yale. Yale, please, when prompted, unmute and begin to speak.
The following are the potential impacts of the Picasso operation in land-intensive agriculture zones. Number 1, Picasso sets a dangerous precedent for the existence of non-agricultural business in an agricultural zone. The impact of Picasso will weaken our policy that protects and preserves agriculture. 2, the cost of housing in Sonoma County is sky high. We still have multi-generational farms. If we allow Picasso to inflate home prices, the land will be unaffordable to our new generation of farmers. 3, when real estate development becomes the most profitable way to capitalize on rural property, the incentive to farm and the value of farming as a profession decreases. 4, our agricultural lands are our food security. Wine and grapes are our current product, but crops are cyclical. Our climate, soils, and environment will provide as long as we protect our agriculture. The farm community bands together around farming and most recently fire. We've had 2-week-long evacuations over the last 4 years. Some community members lost their homes, barns, machinery, and everything. Navigating the level of safety with fractional owners with interval stays is going to be hard. Water, our aquifers suffer from abnormally low rainfall. Managed lodging accommodations use more water than the average household. To conclude, I ask the Board of Supervisors to continue the intent.
That concludes our time. Thank you for your comments. Our next commenter is David. David, when prompted, please unmute and begin to speak.
Hello, my name is David Applebaum, and I'm a 20-year resident in Sonoma. I want to thank the board for their due consideration against Picasso. I think it's an absolute absurdity to continue to allow them to operate unfettered without proper rules and regulations. All of the conditions that they speak to in their marketing, in their promotion, and in their operations are based on hypotheticals. There is no proof of any kind that there is a problem with second home ownerships that are uninhabited, that they bring any kind of additional income to the areas where they operate in, and more importantly, that they provide a significant economic boost. More importantly, they take away from the current hospitality industry by keeping residents out of hotels, by preventing jobs in the hotels, high-paying jobs in agriculture, in landscaping, in reception, and in cleaning. More importantly, it is the whole problem the transient vacation occupancy. These are not owners. They do not have their own things there. They do not have their own property there. They are managed hotels by Picasso. And having them come in strictly for 2 weeks is exactly the same as a home rental from VRBO or from Airbnb. It's 24-hour party time at all times. Any kind of policy just simply is unenforced, as other communities.
That concludes our time. Thank you for your comment. Our next commenter is Liza. When prompted, please unmute and begin to speak.
Hello, this is Liza Graves, and I have a couple of comments on this. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other now, but I do want to point out a few things. It would be very helpful to understand what the real impacts, not feared impacts, are of the 3 Picasso homes in Sonoma, as well as the ones in St. Helena, on things like traffic, noise. Have there been all-night parties? That would be some very important information to have to assess this issue. Secondly, not knowing the legal options for the county to restrict fractional. I think at a minimum, the vacation rental restrictions on things like occupancy, noise, activities between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. could apply and maybe should apply to the fractional owners when they're in residence. And finally, please don't lump all LLCs together. Many owners in the county have their properties in LLCs for a variety of reasons. They're not all, they're designed to protect owners, and they're not all a Picasso model. There are not 28,000 Picasso models in Sonoma County that are LLCs. Thank you.
Chair Hopkins, that was our last commenter.
Thank you very much, Karen. I appreciate it. I will bring it back to the board for comments on this item. And I would look to my colleagues who have been sort of, I think, the most impacted and the most vocal about bringing this before the board. Supervisor Gorin or Gore?
Yeah. So I want to make a couple comments and then look towards kind of follow-up questions about what we do with this time that we have before us today. I also want to call out a couple things. One is the fact that, there's been the comment about NIMBYs, and there's been another comment about, well, it's only a few houses or other things. And I think I just want to state that, in my opinion, as I'm gonna poach a quote that somebody else said in reference to this action or this business structure is that if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. This is a commercial use in an area designated as land-intensive agriculture that does not allow commercial use. I would take that beyond the land-intensive agricultural designation, and I would go into other areas as saying, does this qualify? Is it a timeshare? Is it not a timeshare? Do we have multi-tenant occupancy allowances in those areas, or do we not? And, the reality is that if you do anything commercial in an area designated as land-intensive agriculture, you have to go through a lengthy use permit process. If you want to grow cannabis, you got to go through a lengthy use permit process. If you want to do a winery that even has tasting by appointment only, or just a production facility, you have to do that. And we have also said by decree of this board and according to our general plan is that we do not allow vacation rental by owners in land-intensive agriculture. The only thing we allow is farm stays, which are very restrictive, and the reason they're not flourishing is because it does require a heightened degree of stewardship. You have to be an owner on property. You have to be more of in an agriturismo mode like we see in places like Italy and others. And so when you don't just have a fractional ownership that is an LLC, but you have a company that tends to that and sends services to those areas, furnishes the place, brings people in and out, cleans before and after, you know what that sounds like to me? It sounds like a hospitality operation. And so I am interested in addressing this from a few different places. One is our current code and the enforcement potential. And then the second thing is what kind of legislation we have to look at in terms of how this fits or what loophole is being taken advantage of that we need to close. So that's going to dictate kind of a variety of my comments, and I'm interested in hearing from my colleagues a little bit before I start to propose things. But I also want to honor the stories of Jan and Yael and a couple others who called in and acknowledge that, they did call our office in January, and it already started a couple months before. We met with them. There was a lot of frustration that this area that has been protected for agriculture primacy, and then obviously there's rural ranchettes that live out there as well, that this area was a threat to the direct neighbors, but also to the wider area. They're used to seeing small sparks turn into large fires in terms of issues that impact their area. They're very used to, as Lou Preston said, issues where even though we have a right to farm ordinance that sanctifies and says that you can do ag practice in those areas, they're very used to the fact that people complain about the smoke and they complain about night harvest and they complain about other things when the primacy is agriculture and it is not commercial activity and hospitality. And I also want to honor the fact that they've been waiting for us to talk about this publicly since January. And there is a threat of litigation. It was denoted, it was talked about, but I want to give voice to the fact that us having continued conversations about the risk of taking action does not obviate our responsibility to protect against what we see as our code and what we see as contrary to land use in specific areas. So, everybody's worried about being sued by a big company that raises a lot of money, right? I challenge myself and us to look at what are the zoning actions now that we can take, what is our reliance upon our own code that we need to depend upon for that, and then secondly is what legislative actions do we need to make and who do we need to team up with to do that. I know that Hillsburg and Sonoma specifically, I mean, these are tourist havens. They're very interested in collaborating with us. I do know, even though staff didn't mention a lot of it, that there is a lot of different counties and cities that are trying to figure out how to move on this and how to move in a way that they don't get hammered with lawsuits and lumped into situations where they owe millions of dollars in lawyer fees because they are trying to make sure that their code actually enforces what it needs to and what they see it as, but that there's a legal loophole that needs to be identified. I'm also interested in what actions we take in our state portfolio with requests to the state legislature to take care of this for all counties and all cities, not just those of us who are willing to step in and be sued to do what we think is right. That's my statement for me, not for anybody else up here. So after I hear from my colleagues, I think you can tell I'm interested in direction to staff. I'm interested in us taking action in front of us and then future action legislatively, and then us being a part of a coalition that addresses this honorably. Final thing I'll say is I got nothing against any company. Companies try to figure out what makes the best opportunity for money. I would love to only have to invest 12% into a luxury property that my wife and I could visit. But the reality is that I see this very directly as contrary to what our code states and what our practice is on the ground with respect to land-intensive agriculture specifically and some of our other zoning. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gore. Supervisor Gorin?
I really want to thank Supervisor Gore for his leadership on this issue. He's been meeting with his constituents very early on, very aggressively. I believe there's one Picasso home just outside of the city of Sonoma, and the circumstances are different. It's not LIA. It's actually in, I believe, a rural residential area, zone for single-family detached uses. And in fact, this board approved a vacation rental exclusion overlay zone for this neighborhood. So this fractional ownership model flies in the face of the policies that were crafted by this board to protect the neighborhood as a place so that families could come together, could live very close to the amenities of the city of Sonoma. And so I'm looking for a mechanism that we can use to address Picasso ownership homes in both of these circumstances, because indeed the impacts of a fractional ownership are very similar, if not identical or greater than the impacts from vacation rentals that we are legislating against. So I think it's important for this board to explore and take any action that we can take. I am concerned about this fractional ownership model populating and expanding in areas that people did not intend to have this impact in. And I'll use an example. Early in the recession in 2008, 9, 10, when Sonoma Valley was just beginning to be discovered as a vacation rental model, we had business consortiums, LLC, coming in aggressively into the Springs area and buying up not 1, 2, 3, but 5 to 10 homes to be used as vacation rentals. And that's part of the legacy that we've been trying to act in our policies to stop, because we need to protect the concept of the neighborhoods, the homes for single-family residential. There still is a place for that, and that's what we celebrate. But I do want to thank all of the property owners in both Dry Creek and Sonoma Valley for speaking out, acting in concert, but also verifying Liza Graves' questions about how we document the impacts of the fractional ownership homes moving forward. So I'm absolutely in support of action moving forward, and I thank my colleagues and all of the folks involved in this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Supervisor Gorin. Supervisor Corsi?
Thanks. I appreciate hearing from the public, particularly those who live in some of these impacted communities. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Supervisor Rabbit?
I would say ditto. And I think we all understand that homeownership comes in many different ways, as was mentioned. And I think it's an interesting issue for us that we have been dealing with and will continue to deal. And I support staff looking into all the different avenues that have been discussed earlier, and appreciate hearing from the public as well.
Thank you, Supervisor Abbott. I want to sort of honor and acknowledge the public comments on this item. You know, some of the things that were said, transitory occupancy, commercializing our neighborhoods, it's no different from the swinging door of a hotel. And I do have to say that a lot of the descriptors that were used also describe vacation rentals and short-term rentals that we experience in the many thousands out in West County. And so, you know, I, for one, am really interested in kind of expanding the scope of our vacation rental ordinance and community engagement process to look at this kind of an issue. I also think it's important, you know, I feel like there's sort of this idea of, kind of commercializing and sort of streamlining the fractional ownership process. But I also want to acknowledge that sometimes there are fractional ownerships that are amongst family members, which sometimes even actually are an LLC in terms of how they hold the property. There are fractional ownerships that are among friends who are, unrelated by blood, but for whom, it's not this kind of commercial piece that's sort of brought together. And so, I just want to acknowledge that and to have conversations surrounding kind of the different types of fractional ownerships and the different models. But I believe that this merits further investigation. And I do think it's kind of about the big picture from my perspective of the integrity of our code, the integrity of our housing stock, and the integrity of our neighborhoods. And so, I, for one, would certainly support kind of having this conversation. Also think that it's really critical to talk about vacation rentals and other uses that were perhaps not envisioned when the, general plan was developed in terms of the zoning, right? We since have implemented a vacation rental ordinance, but we are in the process of updating it. So with that, would love to sort of hear from my colleagues regarding their thoughts.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment about vacation rentals and the ordinance and coming back and having this included as the legislative part in that. So the question to staff would be, we continue to go through the vacation rental discussion. When are we planning to have that come back to the board?
Through the chair, thank you, Supervisor, for the question. Tentatively scheduled to be at the board in March, I believe the 5th Tuesday in March of 2022.
Okay, so that's one side, which is the discussion of a policy and legislative action. On the other side, I'm interested in getting a sense from whoever feels comfortable responding to it, to how this interacts with our current code. So there was discussion. Somebody talked about, started quoting numbers 2624130. Followed by 2628160. Another thing that we've talked about is multi-tenant occupancy, where it's allowed, where it's not. I want to ask specifically about where this stands in terms of our current code and in our ability to take enforcement or not.
Council.
We're not prepared to answer questions like that today, Supervisor Gore.
Okay. Well, I would challenge us to consider how we are going to answer those questions. What I hear behind this is that we might know some of that, but we're not prepared to answer that. I think the public deserves that in whatever way that comes. I'm not going to become a jerk about that right now, but I am going to push for us to identify how we bring this back and how we have transparency associated with it. My assessment by some of the documents I've reviewed and looking at our own code is that this does go counter to our current zoning. And I might scare you, but I'm going to propose a motion that I'm going to look for support from our colleagues in some way, but that brings back to the board before the end of the year an analysis in public session of our current code in relation to Picasso, as well as directing to staff to take action to implement or put this legislatively into our vacation rental ordinance discussion coming in May.
Is that a motion?
Yes, it is.
I will second that.
I think maybe we should have a little bit of discussion on that motion before we vote on it. Just speaking personally, I have a lot of apprehension around trying to schedule something before the end of the year, which is about a month out. That doesn't give staff any time. And I also would want to know what other priorities are being shifted. Are we going to be postponing work on the vacation rental ordinance in order to bring this forward? Because we have thousands of vacation rentals. We have a handful of Picasso sort of things in the county. And so I think that in terms of sort of what the majority of the community perhaps is impacted by, that I don't want to sort of jump something that is, quite frankly, has more limited defined impact at this point in time, even though it's important, and I recognize that you're hearing from your constituents, over something that has been an ongoing process, and I can tell you is very much requested by many, and I think many in your district as well, who are impacted by vacation rentals. So I think that pacing is really important, and I'm curious to hear what my colleagues on the board have to say. Supervisor Abbott, Supervisor Corsi, and also CAO Bratton, if you have any thoughts on, just sort of staff workload between now and the end of the year, and we have, Thanksgiving coming up next week and the holidays. I think it's challenging.
Well, I think I echo your comments and really being cautious about how we move forward. I don't doubt that staff is not working diligently on this item. I realize that because of the threat of lawsuit, quite frankly, a lot of it is done behind the scenes, and that's how that particular avenue ends up working. Or else we can talk about it all today, and we could go to, or we can be challenged and end up with nothing. I think we need to be smart how we move forward, diligent as we move forward, and we need to recognize that staff is working currently, and as you mentioned, the proportionality of the effective issues that we're all dealing with is just different going forward. I respect having this conversation today, giving the public the opportunity to address the issue and for the board to hear that and make comment, but I think I would be a little more reserved in my actions going forward.
I'll echo the last two comments. I really appreciate the leadership of Supervisors Gore and Gorin on this, but as a young guy, I learned the hard way that it's not always best to lead with your chin. So I'd like us to take I guess I'm saying we should take a careful approach here. I don't know exactly what that means, but I don't think it's even feasible at this point to get this done by the end of the year. So I'm not objecting to moving this forward, but I think we need to be cautious.
Maybe I'll, instead of forcing a vote on something that I've heard loud and clear, what I'll do is pull it back and look for a different path forward. My intention is to, first and foremost, is answer the question that the community is asking for right now, which is not being answered, which is, how does our code apply to this? That's the core of what I'm interested in, is not in a full board meeting, not a full session, some way that is not just us saying we're reviewing this. I want to be clear with the board. If we want to talk about threat of litigation, I've had these same constituents who say, well, maybe if that's the way this works, then we have to threaten litigation to the county board to have you actually sit down with us and talk about how this applies. So, it's a crazy thing to have your constituents come to you and say, it's a sad world, when I feel like to have a firm answer from staff that I have to threaten litigation because you're worried about those who are threatening litigation from another side. But if that's the case, then that's the case. I will say, though, is that we need to address this, and we need to find a way to become public about it, about how we're addressing that. Hearing from folks at one point and then shelving it for 4 or 5 months is I don't know if that's appropriate. So one of the things that I'm interested in, here's another question, is for the staff on the call, is there's always, anytime you don't take action on something that's happening in your community, and you say we're gonna take care of it legislatively, we're gonna look at this. The second question is does it create a grandfathering clause? What determines? So if I'm not even going to ask you. I want to frame this appropriately. I'm not asking you right now to talk to me about the compliance one way or the other with our current codes. What I am saying is that more of a general comment is, if we do not take action as things are moving in our community, is there any kind of a requirement of grandfathering, or is grandfathering really a policy of a board at a later time?
I think perhaps what you're referring to are legal nonconforming uses when the zoning code changes.
Yeah.
But there were prior uses that were allowed under prior codes, but then later become prohibited under new codes. So that concept of legal nonconforming use is sort of a standard concept in land use that would apply, in speaking very generally, for code changes.
Okay. And I think a part of that is I think the first question that would need to be answered at the end of that with respect to whether it's Santolina or us or Hillsburg or whoever is looking at this with respect to not just future code potential changes, but with their existing code, is that legal already? Is it legal, and are we just not taking action, or is it really illegal, or is it a big gray area based on identification at council and who ultimately takes us to court and answers these questions? I don't think you have the answers to that now, so I'm not going to ask for them. I think what I am going to do is work with our board, work with county council, and find a way for us to address what our current code is and get some clarity to the public about where this fits and where it doesn't, and pursue that. And then the second thing is I do want to see my board's interest in including this into the vacation rental conversation. Obviously not complicating them together, but bringing it in. I heard one of interest there, and I would just kind of looking around, seeing if that's a supportive area legislatively.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Supervisor Corsi. Supervisor Rabbit?
I only ask, what does that mean, bringing it into that conversation? We have that conversation. We have this conversation. Are they one and the same? Is there benefit to them being one and the same, or should they be? It seems to me that there's unique circumstances in this conversation we're having today. This is not the kind of conversation that we would have if we were just talking about short-term vacation rentals.
Yeah.
So I just don't know what that means. I'm supportive of staff continuing down the road of trying to come to more clarity on all of these issues and making sure that our zoning code reflects the board's and the community's desires.
Maybe sorry, apologize.
Oh, no, go for it.
I was just going to look at staff and say, so we talked about when we're bringing vacation rentals back. Is there any thoughts on on if we were to vote on bringing this with it? Is this the right thing to do, to pull these together? Would we want to pull them together and keep them, parallel but equal, but different discussions? I mean, a lot of times we bring together an item that covers a theme and have 2 or 3 different discussions within that. And I say that with respect to, what chapter the vacation rental sits in the county code, and if this is separate with respect to actually zoning ordinances or anything. If we were looking to legislate a discussion on this or potential legislative actions, would it align with vacation rentals?
Well, through the chair, I think we can discuss those types of land uses, not ownership types, that detract from owner occupancy of residential properties.
Mm-hmm.
But so I am trying to keep this focused, as we always do in our legislation, on land use impacts. And where this particular issue gets very complicated very quickly, as I think we've borne out in the discussion this afternoon, is around ownership.
Okay.
And Picasso isn't the only other business, and neither is Airbnb or VRBO. There are other business types out there that may affect residential occupancy. So to the extent we can generally discuss land use impacts, we can identify those other uses as part of the vacation rental ordinance update.
I would also add that the Planning Commission is hearing the vacation rental ordinance. There's a workshop on Thursday of this week.
Right.
And certainly that's, the focus is vacation rentals. That's the testimony we're anticipating. But there's nothing to stop people from saying they want this included in that process. But to the extent the scope is beyond vacation rentals to short-term use of residential property, that's a different concept. So I think if it expands the scope of what the vacation rental ordinance update process fundamentally is, that could slow down the process of coming to conclusion. That's my anticipation.
Yeah, my goal is not going to be to slow anything down that's already had significant amount of effort. And so I know that would not get support from my board, and I would not push that on staff to do that. I think maybe the appropriate place for me to dive into this is for agenda for the upcoming calendar year as we get into our retreat. We do have a packed schedule in between now and the end of the year. I understand that. I've heard from my colleagues on that issue, and for me, I'm going to be focused on as much as the land use and the legislative opportunities here is as much as anything is the legality and continuing to. So I just anticipate I'm not going to ask for something that I will not get support on, and I don't know exactly how I would refine it, which is to ask for a motion to take code enforcement action on something that I'm not getting public input on or private input from my lawyers openly. So I'm going to work through a process to work directly with county council and others and stay close. And obviously, I'm interested in taking action. But my goal is to figure out a way that I can get the support of my colleagues in a genuine way to do it appropriately. So thank you.
Supervisor Gorin?
I seconded the motion because I wanted you to know that I understand the urgency and agree with the urgency of potential action moving forward, but somehow I knew that we were not going to be able to address this issue by the end of the year. Any way that we can appropriately put this discussion on the agenda to contemplate additional action is absolutely the way we need to go forward. Thank you for the reminder about the vacation rental ordinance and modifications moving forward, and I don't necessarily want to sandbag those. I agree with Supervisor Gore. It's been a long time that we advocated for those modifications to come forward. However, in the case of a fractional ownership home in an already existing vacation rental exclusion zone, it does mean that there are similar considerations in that circumstance, which may differ from the Picasso-owned homes in Dry Creek Valley in the LIA zones. So it may question and raise the possibility of two different directions to move to address the potential action going further. And but I think it's important to differentiate between the two and speculate how the impacts may be the same, but we may have to take different routes to get there. So thank you all. Appreciate Jennifer and all of your great suggestions. Obviously, everybody in Permit Sonoma as well.
All right. Any further comments from the board? And do we feel like we have sort of sufficient clarity in terms of next steps, which it sounds like is really revisiting it during our calendaring conversations in January? Does that sound, and to make sure that we fit it into the work plan accordingly?
I guess the other thing I want to acknowledge is a comment made by Supervisor Rabbit in a positive way is that while this might sound like it's completely being tabled, I do want to acknowledge that staff has put a lot of work into this. Our council has put a lot of work into it, and I consider it an ongoing issue. While it's not being addressed by some of our constituents or some of us in a way that's outside of that, I acknowledge that, but I also honor the work that's being done each and every day, and we'll stay close to that. So thank you.
Great. So with that, we have heard from members of the public. We have had some direction to staff, and I believe that concludes our agenda item. Thank you so much for bringing this forward, and I also want to acknowledge it was on relatively short notice, so thank you for pulling together a presentation and sharing that information.